All right, let's get right into it. When you think about housing bubble, let's be honest, Pennsylvania probably isn't the first state that pops into your head. For the longest time, it's had this reputation for being just rock solid, a place where the housing market just kind of plods along nice and steady. But that whole story, that belief we've all had, it's starting to change, and in some pretty big ways. And this quote from our source material absolutely nails that old idea. Pennsylvania was the safe bet. While you saw other markets going completely wild, booming one minute and busting the next, this was that dependable middle ground. It was the place you could buy a house and not have to lose sleep at night worrying about it. Well, that foundation of stability, it's definitely showing some cracks. We're starting to see these fault lines appear all across the state. So in this explainer, we're going to dig into why price reductions are suddenly stacking up and why sellers are being forced to lower their expectations for really the first time in years. So first up, let's really unpack what we're calling Pennsylvania's housing myth. This whole idea that the market there is just unshakable. I mean, just look at the contrast on this slide. It lays it all out. The old story was simple: safe, dependable, steady growth, and it was a seller's market all day long. But the new reality? It's a totally different picture. We're seeing those cracks. We're seeing price reductions become the norm, and maybe most importantly, the power is shifting. Buyers are getting leverage they just haven't had in a long, long time. So, what's behind all this? What's really driving this big shift? Well, at its very core, it's one fundamental problem that we can call the great income disconnect. And this chart right here, it tells the whole story. Over the last few years, home prices just shot for the moon. They climbed to levels that were completely out of whack with what local paychecks could ever realistically support. That huge gap you see between how fast home prices grew and how slowly local incomes grew, it created this tension in the market that just couldn't last. And now we're seeing the fallout. Okay, so this big income gap, it's exposed three underlying issues, three hidden cracks, if you will, that are now showing up in city after city across the state. These are the three big pressures you need to get. First, that income disconnect we just talked about, simple affordability crisis. Second, the hidden costs. You gotta remember, Pennsylvania has tons of older homes, and during the buying frenzy, people just ignored stuff like old plumbing, leaky roofs, ancient electrical. Well, guess what? Those bills are coming due. And third, what we're calling the investor squeeze. Rents can only go up so far before tenants just can't pay anymore, and that's putting a hard cap on how much money investors can actually make. So now, let's take a look at how these hidden cracks are actually playing out on the ground. We're gonna dive into a few specific cities. First up is Lancaster. For a long time, this was seen as the perfect safe bet. It's charming, it was way more affordable than a big city, and it seemed super stable. But then, a flood of buyers from outside the area came in and pushed prices up into a territory that the local economy and the old housing stock just couldn't handle. And in Lancaster, you see all three of those cracks showing up at once. Homes that would have been gone in a weekend are now sitting there for weeks with multiple price cuts. New buyers are getting scared off by huge, unexpected repair bills for these older houses. And yep, investors have hit that rental ceiling. All of a sudden, the sure thing is turned into a real balancing act. Okay, next, let's head over to Erie. You'd think being right there on a beautiful lakefront would be a massive advantage, right? But what we're seeing is that all that natural beauty just isn't enough to make up for some really deep economic problems, like a declining population and a shaky job market. And in Erie, there's another layer of pressure, the climate itself. Those brutal winters come with real ongoing costs that just drain a homeowner's budget. That financial strain is forcing more and more distressed homes onto the market, and that, in turn, drags down prices for everybody else. And with fewer people living there, there's just no safety net for owners who need to sell or rent. And finally, that brings us to Philadelphia. Philly is at the top of this list for a reason. It's the perfect storm. It's the one place where pretty much every single housing pressure we've talked about all comes together in one huge, complicated market. In Philly, it's not just one thing, it's everything, all at once. The costs just to own a home, taxes, insurance, utilities, are skyrocketing. You've got quality of life issues pushing some families out to the suburbs. Investors are getting nervous and pulling back because of new rules and angry tenants. And you know those classic Philly homes with the super tight staircases and no parking? Yeah, those are getting hit the hardest, seeing the biggest price drops of all. So, after looking at all these examples, you have to ask, what does this all mean for the whole state? Where do we go from here? So here's the key takeaway. This is not a dramatic 2008-style collapse. The source material calls it a market reset. Think of it more like a slow, grinding adjustment where prices gradually, painfully move back to a level that local incomes can actually support. It's a correction, for sure, but it's not a catastrophe. And that really brings us to our final thought for today. As this whole market goes through this slow, grinding reset, it forces all of us to ask a much bigger question. What does home value even mean anymore? Is it about that crazy price someone was willing to pay at the peak of the frenzy? Or is it about what a local community can actually afford and sustain tomorrow? Definitely something to think about.